Okay, so today we're going to do 10.4, solving radical equations. So this is when you have a variable under a radical and you need to isolate the variable. Okay, so here we go. Step one, we're going to isolate the radical on one side of the equation. All right, so isolate the radical. Step two, we're going to square both sides of the equation to eliminate the radical. And then we're going to solve the equation. I should have said that. That's going to be then solve. And finally, and this is really important, we need to check for what are called extraneous solutions. Okay, sometimes we get a solution that is not a solution of the original equation. So sometimes when we square something and then we go back and we plug the numbers back in, they don't work. So in this lesson, it's going to be really important for us to do that. Okay, so here we go, example number one. Step one, isolate the radical. Well, the radical is already isolated. That's all that's on the left side. So the only way to get rid of a radical, okay, because this is a square root, is to square both sides. So whatever you do to the left side, you have to do to the right side, so that balances. Now, what happens when you square the square root of x? We just get x. And then you get on the right side 25. Now we want to just double check, so I'm going to go back in here. We're going to check square root of 25. Does that equal 5? Yes, we do get 5 equals 5. So we know that is our solution. Okay, so B, step one, isolate the radical. So the radical is already on the left side. So we're at step two, we're going to square both sides. So I get 2a, because the square root and the square cancel each other out. And when I square negative 8, I get a positive 64. Now we're going to divide both sides by 2. So we get a equals 32. Now we're going to check. So I have square root of 2 times a, which is 32. Does that equal negative 8? So we get square root of 64. Square root of 64, though, is positive 8, not equal to negative 8. Therefore, a cannot be equal to 32. We're actually going to say this one has no solution. All right, C. Step one, isolate the radical. So we're going to subtract 5 from both sides. So I have square root of a is equal to, so 6 minus 5 gives us 1. We want to get rid of the square root, so we're going to square both sides. So here I get a. 1 squared just gives us 1. Now we're going to check. So I'm going to substitute back in 1 is a. And I want to see if I plug it back into the original equation, do I get 6? Well, square root of 1 is 1. 1 plus 5 equals 6. Yeah, 6 equals 6. So a equals 1. D. Okay, we're going to isolate the radicals, so we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. I get square root of 5x plus 1 equals 4. And that's all I can do to isolate the radical. So now I'm going to square both sides. And we get the whole thing, 5x plus 1. On the right side, it's 4 squared is 16. Now we're going to isolate the variable, so I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. I get 5x equals 15. Divide both sides by 5, and we get x equals 3. Now we're going to check the solution. So I'm going to plug back in, so it's 5 times 3 plus 1, and then outside the radical plus 2. Does that equal 6? So here we get 15 plus 1, so that's square root of 16, which gives us 4. 4 plus 2 does equal 6. That checks out. So we get x equals 3. Okay. Maybe you want to try the next one on your own. Maybe you want to pause it and try the next few on your own, and then you can watch and see if you get them correct. Here we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. So I have square root of 8s equals 4. We want to get rid of the square root, so we're going to square both sides. I get 8s equals 16. Divide both sides by 8, and I get s equals 2. We're going to check. So I have square root of 8 times 2 plus 1. Does this equal 5? So this is square root of 16, which is 4. 4 plus 1, does that equal 5? Of course it does. That checks. So s equals 2. Next one. Okay, so this one I have a square root on both sides, but really it's just, we want to make sure that the square root of the variable is isolated, which it is. So we're going to square both sides. Now, 5 root 2 times 5 root 2. I'm just going to write it out so that we remember how to multiply radicals. So you multiply the whole numbers, which is 25. Square root of 2 times square root of 2 is 2. So we get x equals 50. So let's see, when I plug it back in, we want to see, is 5 root 2 equal to the square root of 50? So remember, square root of 50 we can simplify to the square root of 25 times square root of 2. And we do get 5 root 2. So x equals 50. Okay, so let's take a look at the next page. All right, so first thing we want to do is subtract 2 from both sides. We have square root of negative m equals 3. So we're going to square both sides. So I do end up with a negative m equals 9. And then we're going to divide both sides by negative 1. And I get m equals negative 9.